Very good evening, everyone. It's lovely to be with you again. So this evening's talk, I hope you'll enjoy it. It's entitled "What's So Special About VHF UHF?" As Nigel said, I've always been really interested in VHF and UHF. And I suppose it's got a sort of real sense of magic for me. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got there and what I find magic about it, in the hope that you might find something in there to enthuse you as well. I hope it's gonna I hope it's gonna work, but we'll see. So, why would you go on VHF? Why would you bother operating on VHF? And it seemed to be, at least a year or so ago, not a month would go by without some moan in the letters column of Radcom or PW or wherever, Facebook or whatever. Oh, there's no activity on VHF. Why do I bother? So on and so forth. All I can say to that is, don't believe everything you read. And obviously, I should know because I write some of it. Please don't believe everything you read in the letters column. It's I'd like to show you as we go through things that there is plenty of activity on VHF UHF. It might just be not where you're expecting to hear it. So why is VHF special to me? Well, like I guess many of us, my very first QSO on the amateur bands back in 1983. I was very young then, was on 2 meters FM. I remember it well, and it was using one of these rigs, an FT480. Wonder if any of you had an FT480 or even an FT780 for 70 SEMS. They were nice little rigs. They were sort of designed as mobiles, and they had the very distinctive S meter, and if it was, if somebody was really strong, the three red lights on the right hand side would light up. Looked fantastic on SSB, I can tell you. So yeah, nice rigs. But I started off on 2 meters as G6 TTU back in I think it was about March 1983, and started off on FM and played around a little bit on SSB, and it was great. That I'd listened an awful lot before getting my license on HF. I had a shortwave receiver, and thoroughly enjoyed listening around, the bands. 10 meters was really good in those days. And I think at some point I did somehow acquired a 2 meter to 10 meter microwave modules converter. And I just about managed to make that work and plug it into my Sony ICF 2001 receiver, which was my shortwave receiver, and I could just about hear on 2 meters, the occasional FM signal or the repeater over in Malvern or something like that. So getting a proper aerial up on 2 meters and having a nice rig with the 480, it was interesting to start learning about VHF propagation, and it amazed me, sort of going back then. And I suppose it still does, really, how there can be such a variation in sort of tropo type signals. I particularly remember one evening listening to a guy in sort of the middle of Ireland, and he was S9+++ on 2 meters, and I thought, this is amazing. We had a lovely chat, and I thought, oh, it'd be really nice to chat to him again at another time. Do I never heard him again. It's a real shame. And it was just astonishing to me how signals could vary that much. And I included a QSL there. I wonder if any of you remember Dick EI9Q. Well, Dick was another really big VHF UHF operator from Southern Ireland. He probably just as well he's not around anymore. He'd be really loud with me, I would have thought, these days. But he lived in Waterford, and I remember, tuning around on 70 sems and with the beam west, you'd very often hear Dick at huge strength, and it was interesting because he was sometimes a lot louder on 70 sems than he was on 2 meters. So all these sorts of things they started to get me interested in VHF and UHF propagation and how things could change and how the weather affected it, and all that sort of stuff. Um, and part of that I think was starting to learn the difference between propagation modes. How do you tell the difference between tropospheric propagation and sporadic propagation? We can cover that if you like. I'm not going to ask anyone, don't worry. But it is really, really interesting to start learning about those things. So I found that really interesting, and and of course that all sort of fed into a sort of general, oh, well, what's going on sort of VHF UHF generally. And I was just about sort of getting, I think actually no, I just passed my Morse test and become G4VXE. And I was really enjoying 2 meters. And there was, I don't know if any of you remember, probably some of you've got one of these rigs, an FT790, a little 70 sems version of the FT290 portable, which does FM and sideband and CW. Talking handbag, they kind of called them at the time. To our eyes now, they're probably quite big, but compared to something like a 817 or an 818, but nice little tidy rigs. And I'd been quite intrigued by 70 sems. A lot of the local guys in the club were using FM to chat over, as a chat channel around the town. I was living in Cheltenham at the time, and so I bought one of these FT790s. I was kind of intrigued at the time because it had 1 watt out, and you think, well, crumbs, I can't do anything with 1 watt, It's a tiny amount of power. But actually, I soon worked out that 1 watt on 70 sems, if you've got a decent aerial, will go quite well. And of course, it was great for chatting across town with friends. We used to use SU8. Do any of you remember the old designations? SU8. It was 432.2. I think it's a repeater channel now. We used to use that as a chat channel. But also I put a 21 element toner up. And this was when I was still living at home with my parents. Bless my father, he never once complained. A 21 element toner for 70 sems is pretty big. I would be quite scared to put one up on our house, certainly with the winds we get. But anyway, bless him, Dad never complained, and I put this 21 element up. And I remember, even with a watt on 70 sem sideband, managing to work Richard GD80XI on the Isle of Man. I did fairly quickly get a little microwave modules 30 watt amp, and I made some interesting QSOs. I was able to work up to Scotland and Switzerland and things like that. So that was a really interesting time getting onto 70 sems. And this was about the time I got my G4. And I remember somebody saying, oh, it's a bit odd, you pass your Morse test and we're getting on 70 sems. That's kind of weird. Hey. And then in 1986, 50 megahertz was released to what was then all the Class A licensees. So that's the people that had passed a Morse test. It had previously been available to some permit holders, which I think something like 100 permit holders. Can't exactly remember now, but so that was really good fun to get hold of the bands. And my first 6 meter rig was a IC5 505 portable. I think it was 10 watts out, and I used a wire dipole. And in those days, not that many other countries had permission to operate on 6 meters. So certainly for 1986, I remember doing quite a bit of crossband operation, so that was transmitting on 6 meters and listening on 10 meters on 28.885, and made some of the first QSOs around Europe that year. That was good fun. Of course, very quickly, I soon wanted to improve things, and I got a hold of one of these IC551s, which was again 10 watts, but a slightly nicer form factor to use as a base station, and quite a decent receiver, I think. And I put a 5-element toner up, and it worked quite well. Gradually more stations became active on the band, and more countries got the bands and so on. It became very interesting, and I certainly became fascinated by 6-meter propagation, which continues to this day. Yeah, I still love 6 meters, and although a lot of people, I think, sort of slightly DX'd out on 6 meters with working lots and lots of stations. I still quite enjoy working sporadically in the summer, just people around Europe and a bit further as well. It's just good fun, and amazing how strong the signals can be. So still enjoy that. And in the late 1980s, we started to get some F2 propagation as well, and that was exciting to be part of. I remember hearing LU7DZ from Argentina on CW and sideband. I think I was one of the first people to hear him. I wasn't one of the first people to work him, which was a shame, but it didn't matter. So that was really interesting. I remember phoning up Dave Butler, G4ASR, and said, "Dave, I've just worked Argentina on 6 meters." "No way," he said. So that was good fun. 4 meters, yeah, 4 meters. I played around on 4 meters back in the 1980s using a microwave modules transverter and another wire dipole. I was good at wire dipoles, and of course they were easy to put up where I was. And at the time, the activity was predominantly UK, so you could go on 70.2 and call CQ on CW or sideband, and you'd probably, there was really good activity. It was a nice sort of tropo band. Wasn't much DX around. In the sporadic E season, there was Gibraltar and Cyprus tended to come on, but it had a nice sort of friendly feel to it. And of course, gradually over the years, more countries have got 4 meters, which is really good if you like working DX on 4 meters. Although I think some people will say it's changed the character of the band, and it's not friendly chats to the band that it was. But of course, you can't have it both ways. Yeah, that was 4 meters. And in the early and late 1980s, I did lots of VHF contests. Anybody remember Chris G8TFI? I used to do some contesting with him. Actually, I saw Chris last year. He's given up radio. He's into lots of walking and mountain climbing and things like that. I saw him last year. It was nice to catch up with him after a very long time. And we did quite a few expeditions around sort of squares. GB2XJ, I wonder if you remember the old QTH locator system, XJ Square. It's IN79 these days down in Cornwall on the Lizard. And then that was in 1985, 1986, went up to Scotland and operated from what's now IO97 and IO88. Next year, we went to the Isle of Man. And of course, this was 6 meters up to probably 13 or 9 SEMs, and it was good fun, and there was loads and loads of activity on Tropo, and I think there was a good Tropo opening when we were on the Isle of Man, and I remember working lots of French stations and German stations. That was great, and then of course we started getting into 6 meters in quite a big way. And we went to Gibraltar and operated as ZB2IQ and made loads and loads of QSOs on 6 meters and some on 4 and 2 meters. I remember a great sporadic E opening on 2 meters back to the UK from Gib. That was good fun. And then 1989, I think we went to Madeira, and that was a poor sporadic E year. So we did, we weren't very much on 2 meters at all, but we did make some QSOs on 6, and then finally, just before we all sort of went our separate ways and did other things, we went to Malta as 9H3LF, and that was a big F2 year, and worked some nice DX via transequatorial propagation and F2 and so on. So this is, well, oh yeah, I should include that as well. I also one day I remember I was still living at my parents' house in Cheltenham, and I was just happened to tune down the bottom end of 2 meters, and I could hear this CQ going on from W5UN. Oh, you don't hear a W5 every day on 2 meter CW, do you? And I had a 13 element and a 400 watt amp, and this was CW, as I say, and I did know EME procedure, so that was kind of okay. And I gave him a call and was utterly amazed to work Dave W5UN, and you can see why I worked him without too much of a problem. He had 32 17 element Yagis up, and that thing rotated. On the rotator was a chassis of a Ford pickup truck, which he'd motorized, and you could turn that round, and of course you could change the elevation as well. So that was good fun. So yeah, so I'm in some ways I'm sorry that was a bit of nostalgia and so on, but it does give you a sense of some of the things that you could do on VHF and so on. But things have changed. We can't live in the past, and neither should we. So that was kind of my VHF UHF history. Well, I think everybody, if you're active on VHF and UHF, you'll understand that activity is not like that anymore. It's all quite different. You can't. If you go on to 144-300 and call CQ, you're probably not going to get an answer unless you've got a very good station and there's an opening and. So there's like many of the bands, I guess, less voice and CW, much more data. 144, 174 FT8 is pretty busy. Even where I live, I see quite a few signals, and I'm absolutely sure that where you guys are, you'd see some pretty constant activity. But I think it's interesting, isn't it? The less voice and CW and more data. And I've got friends here in Cheltenham who want it to be like it was, when they were first licensed in the 1950s and so on. And I feel their pain. Yeah, I think they're on a hiding to nothing, to be honest. But it's not just a trend in amateur radio, is it? I don't know what you guys are like, but do you get frustrated if somebody phones you up without sending you a text to see if you're free first? I do. Don't worry, none of you guys have ever done that, so I'm not having a go at all. I do like to have phone calls, but I like them to be at a time of my choosing. You can text me anytime you like. That's absolutely fine, and I'll reply when I can. And I kind of feel that about amateur radio as well. I'll be tuning around on HF, and I quite like HFCW. It's another story, isn't it? But and I quite like rag chewing to people and things like that. But I must admit, there are sometimes I think, do you know what? I haven't got time to call that person now because I know I'm going to be there for 20 minutes. I haven't got 20 minutes. Whereas with an FT8 contact or something, even if it goes badly, you're done in 2 or 3 minutes. So I think that's an overall trend. I think people, by and large, are more up for sort of data type contacts or communication. What else has changed? Weekend contests. Well, yeah, there used to be lots of big weekend contests. I think they're still there, aren't they? But I think they're a lot less popular. VHF Field Day there's a lot less portables out than there used to be. I think the same is true on HF Field Day. I know you guys were out recently, but every club pretty much used to go out on HF Field Day, and pretty much every club used to go out on VHF Field Day as well. But that's very rare now. There are the weekday activity contests, which I think are a really good idea because they're a lot shorter and sharper. Hopefully, give more people a chance to get on and have a go. And the club competition is quite nice and is quite intense, I think. So I'm really glad that those contests came in. The only difficulty about activity contests is that they can lead you to think, well, that's the only time that there's activity on a band, and that's a shame, isn't it? But I think one of the other things that we have to realize is that there are so many more diverse activities. So, back in the 1980s, if you tuned across 2 meters, you'd tune around on FM, wouldn't you? And you'd probably hear some people chatting away, and a couple of the repeaters would be being jammed, and on another repeater you might hear a conversation going on, and you knew where you were, and then you tuned down to sideband and you listened on 144.3, and you'd hear somebody call CQ, and perhaps there'd be some people chatting. But that doesn't necessarily happen now. Why is that? Well, there might be a repeater on. You probably won't hear somebody chatting unless there's a club net going on or something like that. On SSB, it's probably quiet. But on the other hand, there's probably some FT8 QSOs going on 144, 174, which you wouldn't notice if you didn't listen there. You'd just tune past it, wouldn't you? You'd just think it was a birdie on your receiver or something like that. Maybe there's some data comms going on, using DMR or D-Star or something like that. Perhaps a bit more unusual on 2 meters than 70 SEMS, but the point's good. And maybe there's a satellite passing over as well, which of course you'd easily miss. So there's still stuff going on, but it's just really, really easy to miss, and unless you're specifically listening out for it. So I think, when people say there's no activity, well, actually there is. You just have to look in the right place and so on. But I get that's not great. What else has changed? Well, in the olden days, you could buy a single band VHF or UHF multi-mode, and you probably had one for 2 meters, one for 70 SEMS. Perhaps you had one for 6 meters as well. Doesn't happen these days, does it? A lot of the HF rigs come with 6 and perhaps 4 meters as well. But you won't get a single band 2 or 70 SEMS, something like the IC 9700 or some of those other rigs. There are very few VHF UHF multi-modes around. So that's an interesting change. Yeah, I said digital modes, both voice and data, provide lots of existing new possibilities. Well, FT8 is fantastic. If it's not great for chatting, but it is great, really great for making signals go a long way, and you can recover some intelligence out of some really, really weak signals, which is just fantastic for the VHF UHF operator, I think. So that's good. And of course, voice digital modes as well. Who'd have thought that as with your transceiver on 70 SEMS or 2 meters, that you could be talking to somebody all the way around the world, using a sort of network radio system. So that's exciting, and I think particularly for people coming into the hobby. it's never been cheaper to get on the air in some shape or form, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But you know, I occasionally look back through the magazines, you know, Shortwave Mag or PW back in the 1980s, and you look at the prices, and Crumb's rigs were really quite expensive, you know, in terms of, you know, a month's salary or something like that. You know, the cheapest 2 meter handheld, the Icom IC2E. Do you remember that? I think that was about 175 quid or something in the 80s. Well, I think what 175 quid would be nowadays, probably sort of 400 pounds. Can you imagine paying a 400 pounds for a handheld? Oh well, you go to some of the Icom and Kenwood handhelds and you will, but they do other things as well, I suppose. So they've got, you know, data comms and APRS and all that good stuff built in. But you know, your basic handheld, you wouldn't expect to pay 400 quid for that. And of course, the internet, so ubiquitous. So you've got linking possibilities, like we talked about for digital modes, but things like the reverse beacon network, you know, if you call CQ on CW and you immediately know where you've been heard, that's, yeah, that's magic, isn't it? The ability to remote control your station, I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, but that's amazing. You know, I can sit here and I can operate my 6 meter and 2 meter rigs in West Wales. That's fantastic. And things like, you know, the ability to have chats during openings and all that stuff. Echolink, All Star, you know, that's all changed. And I think, you know, what's really important, you know, as I said, you know, I've got friends who kind of wish amateur radio was like it was in the 1950s. There's absolutely no point in going there. We have to roll with the changes and learn to do something new, because if the hobby stays the same, you know, we're going nowhere. It's absolutely you know, dead on its feet. So it's really important that we are doing new things and learning new things, and that brings energy into the hobby, I think. So some things don't change. You know, propagation is still fascinating. Signals can come up out of nowhere, but we do know a lot more about propagation, and we've got much better tools to study and exploit them. I wonder if you've come across the picture on the left is from the Hepburn Tropo forecast. William Hepburn, he analyzes the weather maps, and you can look at his weather maps, and you can see when there's going to be tropo and what direction it's likely to be, and you can see that several days in front. So that's really handy if you're planning a trip out, or planning your work from home day, or you know, whatever. So that's a really good site. And Jim G3YLA, who knows a thing or two about propagation and sporadic E, as I'm sure many of you know. He's got a super site called PropQuest, which will give you a sporadic E forecast and things like that. Also very interesting from an HF propagation point of view as well. But as we're talking about VHF UHF, I sort of point you in the direction of Jim's sporadic E forecast. So yeah, that's a nice way of keeping informed about propagation, and that's something that we certainly didn't have back then. And of course, you know, some things are so much better than they were back in the 1980s. One of the things that I laugh about when I think about it is that, you know, if you wanted to make a 2 meter meteor scatter sched with somebody back in the 80s, you had to you didn't email them, you wrote them a letter, you know, by a stamp and an envelope, and you wrote to them, and they'd write back. And it was lovely, actually. It was really good fun. But of course, now you can just send an email, or you can go on the ON4KST chat or something like that, and it's immediate. So of course you can make contacts a lot more spontaneously. Of course, there was random activity and so on, but it was yeah, it was certainly more complicated to get in touch with other VHF and UHF interested amateurs in those times. Whereas, now we've got DX clusters, DX chat. It's ubiquitous, and we've already talked about the digital modes, but things like meteor scatter, going back to the 1980s, we all used high-speed CW. Well, you could do some sideband if you're a bit of a masochist, but most people used high-speed CW and tape recorders to slow it down. It was good fun. But of course, now you can just use MSK144 or FSK441 out of the WSJT programs, and that works very, very well indeed. And of course, now we've got back in the old days, CW was your friend if you wanted to work weak signals well. And I love that. But FT8 and Q65 will allow you to recover signals that you really can't hear in the speaker, and are much weaker than you would hear on CW. So that can be that's amazing for the VHF UHF amateur, I think. And as I sort of hinted at just now, real terms equipment is much more affordable than it's ever been. You can get on 2 meters and 70 cm sideband kind of. I said under a tenner. Actually, price has gone up. Let's say 20 quid. There's inflation for you, but you can certainly get on really cheaply. We'll talk about that in a second. But I think when I talked about the things back in the 1980s and 1990s, those were the things that struck me as sort of magic about VHF UHF. And you have to find what's magic for you. And of course, what appeals to you about VHF and UHF it's very probably going to be different to what appeals to me. You might love building stuff for VHF UHF, or you might want to play with fast scan TV or digital TV or something like that. And I haven't talked about that at all, but you can do all that stuff, and it's really absorbing and really exciting. So it depends what's interesting to you, and the things that inspire you to go out and do things is going to be different to what inspires other people. And this is what really annoys me. Oh, it doesn't really annoy me. I kind of understand where people are coming from, but it's when people say, oh, why, there was this opening on 6 meters and everybody was on FT8. There was nobody on SSB or CW. Well, yeah, okay. Actually, I wanted to go on FT8 because I wanted to make the very best of the opening. I wanted to work as far as I could with the weakest possible signal I could. I could have gone on CW, yeah, of course I could, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. Whereas sometimes you think, well, I've worked plenty on of this sort of opening. Perhaps I'll go on 6 meter CW and I'll work some stations, and that'll be good fun. But I think it's, we don't all have to enjoy amateur radio in the same way. I think that's a really, really important thing. And we should perhaps be a little bit more tolerant with each other and our interests. So anyway, what do I think is a bit magical at the moment? Well, simple equipment's a good start, isn't it? I'm sure you've come across the Quansheng's little UV5K rigs. The cheapest one I got was 8 quid from AliExpress, which was pretty stunning. I had a quick look on eBay the other day, and most prices were about 20 quid or 23 quid. Well, they're a very acceptable 2 meter 70 sems dual band handheld. Don't be convinced by people that tell you they'll transmit on 10 meters and 6 meters and 4 meters. They will, but the harmonics in other places are horrible, so please don't do it. But they are really tidy little rigs for 2 meters and 70 sems, and they've got a really good receiver. And of course, with the different firmware that lots of clever people have developed, the rig stops being just an FM handheld, and it will actually decode sideband, narrowband activity, so CW sideband, FT8, all those sorts of things. So I can take one of the Quanshengs to the beach with a whip antenna or something like that, sit on the beach and monitor 6 meter FT8 activity using my phone to decode the FT8. Dave G7RAU down on the Lizard, he's worked Steve CT9ATF on Madeira on double sideband. These things won't actually transmit sideband, they're FM radios, but the clever software will mimic double sideband. And yeah, Dave G7RAU has worked Steve CT9ACF on Madeira with one of these radios, so 4 or 5 watts to a whip antenna over sort of 2,000 kilometers or something like that, which is pretty amazing. I haven't done that yet, although I'm looking forward to doing it. I'm sure we will. But what I have done is I quite like, as I hinted earlier, I quite like playing around on CW, and you can get a little iambic paddle which plugs in the side of the Quansheng, and you can key away and send CW on the thing. And of course, it's a hugely portable radio. And I think so far my best DX on both 2 meters and 70 sems is about 100 miles, which isn't bad, and that's just with the rubber duck antenna. So that's good fun. So if you fancy doing a bit of 2 meter and 70 sems CW and just with a really portable radio, this is great, and it's dead easy to take out with you. Similar sort of thing, slightly more expensive rig this time, an FT817, but a wire Moxon. It's actually a dual bander for 2 meters and 70 sems, which was a design put together by David G4VXE, who sadly silent key now. Really good guy. And he was always really keen on VHF UHF, and he put one of these Moxons together. And last year, Alan GM4ZUK, who perhaps some of you know, he was doing actually I think he was setting up for VHF Field Day, and I said to Alan, "Oh, well, let's just stick your beam down here, and let's see if I could hear him." And I could hear him okay. Of course, Alan was running 400 watts to a decent antenna array, and I've got 5 watts and my little Moxon aerial. But fortunately, an aircraft came over, and we were able to complete a very snappy CW QSO. So when Alan came up to S9 plus, so it's amazing what you can do when an aircraft's in the right place, or there's a nice bit of propagation with really simple stuff. And of course, I'm really lucky where I live. We live about a mile from the coast, so we get lovely propagation across the sea. And I was lucky enough to work D4VHF on Cape Verde on 2 meters. Started off, worked him on a beam, but actually also worked them several times on 50 watts and a vertical. If the propagation's good over the sea, it can be pretty good. So that was really nice. And I did even hear D4VHF on 70 sems with a vertical. And I was really hoping that I was going to have a chance to work them on 70 sems. The night the rig heard them, we had a visitor, and I wasn't able to be in the shack, and I thought, oh well, that would be all right. We'll work them the next year. But of course, they had some storm damage at the station and haven't rebuilt, so they're no longer QRV. So haven't worked them on 70 sems. Otherwise, that would be a really nice QSO. But maybe one day, maybe one day. But fortunately, the Canary Islands are on, and Madeira are on, so that can be fascinating to watch how the propagation changes over the sea. So that's one of the things that really inspires me. I know you're a little bit inland, but even so, you will have a good propagation sort of down across the Irish Sea and up to Scotland and the Western Isles and so on. So it can be quite interesting to keep an eye on propagation over those sorts of paths. Always gets a little bit of interest with the amateur radio activity from the International Space Station. I'm sure many of you have listened to some of the educational or school contacts that go on, and people go on. Sort of the space station goes on 145.8 and answers a bunch of questions from kids. Can make good listening. But once every little while, that you get an astronaut on the space station who's keen to talk to regular amateurs as well, and make some genuine contacts, and that's been good fun. And I've been lucky enough to actually have a two-way with one of the astronauts on the International Space Station. That was a couple of years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago. And I think there's a couple of astronauts on the space station at the moment who are occasionally going on the crossband repeater and making some two-way QSOs. So might be worth looking out for that at the moment. But that's something that's a bit special and it's a bit fun to talk about at the club, perhaps. So yeah, those are a few things that I came up with that I thought were sort of a bit of magic, but your magic might be different. So, where can you find activity, and what sort of things might you want to try? Well, don't forget to call CQ. I think a lot of us don't necessarily call CQ. We tend to listen quite a lot, but perhaps we don't call CQ as much as we might do. So do that, and do try and answer a CQ if you hear one. I think it's always nice if you hear a CQ to try and answer it, even if it's just for a very short QSO. But as we talked about earlier, you haven't necessarily got loads of time. You might enjoy the UK activity contests on a Tuesday night through the different bands of the month. So of course, there's FT8 activity sessions on a Wednesday. If you like 2 meter CW, Tuesday night's your thing. 6 meter CW on a Wednesday. I don't think the 6 meter and 4 meter sessions are that busy, but the 2 meter Tuesdays and 70 SEMS Fridays are quite busy between 6:30 and 7:30 GMT. So if you're able to get on at those times, you might make some QSOs. So that's good fun. Up your way, there's a 23 SEMS FM net run by the Bolton. I think it's the Bolton Club. Steve G4AQB is pretty much involved in that. So some of you may know about that already. But if you fancy some 23 SEMS FM. That could be good to do. I think it's a Wednesday, but I'm not immediately sure. SOTA Summits on the Air. There's a lot of 2 meter FM activity from particularly in the summer on SOTA, and where you are, you should hear a lot of portables in the Pennines as well as in North Wales. So that can be quite interesting to work, people on handhelds or simple stations on summits and find out where they are and have some QSOs. So that can be good fun, and highly recommend that to you. There have been a lot of these sort of 145 Alive sessions. There was one last Sunday, wasn't there? And spin-offs 433 Alive and 1296 Megs Alive. People just trying to get on for sort of concentrated 2 or 3 hours and generate some activity. on particular bands. Those 145 alive and 433 alive, I think are totally FM activity. I think 1296 megs. I think they do some sidebands as well. So that's worth keeping an eye on, and good fun. And you know, if you're just tuning around, you might make some QSOs to places that you wouldn't normally do it. And I think, you know, this last one, I'm sure you guys are really good at this, but local and club nets, I think, are really, really important, because they're obvious activity. You know, I talked a little bit earlier about how somebody could tune across the band and they think nothing's happening, whereas actually things are happening, but they just can't hear it on their scanner or their FM rig. So local and club nets, I think, are really, really important to have those on a regular basis, so that you can demonstrate activity there, and so that somebody who does tune across on the scanner and think, that sounds an interesting bunch of people, I should get in touch with them. Maybe I could think about getting a license or something like that. You know, it's rarely as simplistic as that, is it? But the idea isn't a bad one. So, you know, do try and support those nets if you can. I think that's really important. Satellites, you know, the ISS is the crossband repeater on there is tends to be really busy, but it can be quite interesting to listen to. The educational contacts, which you'll very often hear on 145.8, there's quite a few of those go on. And if you look at the ARISS website, that gives you a schedule of the educational contacts. You probably know there are slow scan TV events, which fairly obviously slow scan pictures are transmitted from the ISS, and a lot of people get a great deal of pleasure about decoding and receiving those. So that can be quite good fun to do. Then there's things like meteor scatter on 2 meters and 6 meters, which, you know, with the WSJTX software works really well. Aircraft scatter is something else that you can play with. You know, even if I know where you guys are, close to Manchester Airport, even if you've got a vertical and you're monitoring 2 meters FT8, you'll notice the effect of aircraft taking off and landing on the signals. You'll see huge amounts of Doppler shift on some of the signals, and you can actually use that to your advantage and work some people. So that can be quite good fun. If you get really interested in that, you know, look at software like Air Scout from DL2 ALF, and that looks at, you know, where you are, where the person you want to work is, and the planes that are flying around, and when you should be able to hear each other. So that's really interesting. Nice video from John G3XDY on using Air Scout. What else might you like to try doing? SDR receivers and transceivers, fantastic, you know, because you can see what's going on the spectrum on waterfall of VHF. So, you know, if you like listening to aircraft, which I know some of you do, and that gives you a very visual indication of where signals are. So that can be really good. SDR transceivers, you know, something like the Adon Pluto, it's very low power, just a few milliwatts, but it will transmit and receive between 70 megahertz and 6 gigahertz. So I've got one of these, and I've used it as a receiver for the microwave bands, and it's been really good fun to sort of decode things on 3.4 gigs and 2.3 gigs and so on. So that can be really interesting, and you know, there's plenty of activity around you. So again, that sort of thing could work out really well. You could potentially use it to listen to the 23 SEMS FM net, for example, the little whip, and well, they're not whips, they're little sort of rubber duck type antennas that come with the Pluto. I'm sure if you put that in a northward facing window, you would easily hear some of the participants in the 23 SEMS FM net, and potentially in the UK activity contests as well. So yeah, lots of interesting things that you can do there. So, well then, what's so special about VHF? I've given you what I think is my version, but I'm not saying that's the version. I'm really not saying that. I'm saying, these are the things that have inspired me over the years and the things that have caught my interest. But I hope you found it interesting, the sorts of things that I've talked about. If you didn't, I'm sorry. But hopefully it's given you some thought about the sorts of things that you do enjoy doing on VHF and UHF, and finding other people who are doing the same sort of thing, and trying that sort of stuff out. So there we are. I think that's all I wanted to say, apart from see you on the air. There we are. There's my a screenshot from my remote control of 2 meters and 6 meters FT8, so I can do that from here, which is good fun. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it was interesting. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them. It's sometimes a little bit interesting with remote mics and things like that. So if I do a rubbish job of answering your questions, feel free to email me. I'm GW4VXE at iCloud.com. And if I don't know the answer, I probably know somebody who does. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my slides. Thank you very much for listening, and any questions you have, I'll do my best.
Just a couple of comments about the VHF activity. I think it's a bit like anywhere in media. It's just so fragmented in terms of the number of activities that you can do now. I think that's a bit of a, it's going to be it'll end up being a problem in terms of getting a critical mass for almost any mode. Yeah, I mean, some of the things that people do, I mean, you've talked about the 145 Alive, that sort of stuff, and I think that's good. The key, I really believe, is, and it's difficult to do, but I think is it G4ALG. You've probably been part of these Southwest nets on Friday evenings. Is in Gloucestershire, I think. Mm-hmm. The thing is getting that sort of stuff nationally. I mean, he does the Friday night CW activities, but he's in the Southwest. He's in sort of one corner of the country. Yeah, and it's getting a way of sort of finding like-minded people, who may want to do sort of SSB 2 meter activity, to sort of come together, organise a time, organise dates. And I think there's been Facebook pages set up, like G4LG set up this 2 meter 77 CWSSB thing, but who knows about it? There's all these little groups here and there, and it's people are just sort of like ships passing in the night. I know ON4 KST is good, but that's really for skeds, not for general activity. It's more sort of the quirky sort of activities on VHF. I mean, my feeling is it needs to be a sort of like a club log type thing. Like everyone who sort of has any interest or any suggestions comes together on one platform and says, I'm here in IO83 WJ. I'd like to do 2 meters, SSB or CW or whatever. Who's like-minded? Who wants to do that? What time should we organise? This sort of stuff. I think if this sort of thing happened, it would just be so much easier to get people to come on the air. I think the problem is, like you said, well, why bother? No one's going to be there anyway. And I think what 145 Alive certainly gets right is being able to concentrate at a particular date and a particular time and say, we're going to be on the air. There's going to be plenty of activity, so come on the air. I think that's
I think that as far as the 145 Alive is concerned, what they have done is they've opened up a channel by which amateurs who want to use that particular band can come together and publicise what they're doing. And I think the same goes for 433 Alive as well. I think where you're coming from is that there are so many different aspects to the VHF side of it. If somebody wants to concentrate activity, then is there a mouthpiece there? And I think your column, to a large extent, does that. But obviously, it's somewhere which, being in the printing, it's a
Yeah,
bit behind, isn't it?
it's not as immediate as you might like it to be, is it? No, I mean, I think you had some interesting points. I think you can use ON4KST, you know, for general contacts and tropo stuff, and a lot of people do that. Would your average person use ON4KST? Probably not. No reason why they shouldn't. So, you know, that's something to think about. There's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't. They wouldn't be discouraged from doing so or anything like that. You know, going to Steve G4ALG's CW, I think it's extended beyond the southwest now. You know, he regularly tells me he's working Ken G4RHR over in Suffolk, and G3YPZ who's up in Lincolnshire, and so on and so forth. So I think it does have a wider footprint, but you know, I do agree with you. You know, more and more people need to know about it and to get on, and it is difficult. Yeah, fragmentation's an issue. It's not going to go away. It's probably only going to get worse. So we just have to find our best ways of managing it, I think, and use the tools that we've got available to us. And you know, we have got plenty after all.
I think certainly if you look back, I mean, we say we can't look back really, but I think the point in time where we had Class A and Class B licenses, you know, your Class B is automatically going to graduate to things like 2 meters and 77s, and more than likely they're going to be on SSB as well, rather than just simply FM. You know, especially when you mentioned about the 2 meter or low rigs that are no longer available. It's quite interesting when you walk around some of these rallies, and the number of the older style 2 meter FM stroke SSB rigs that are actually around and being acquired by people and being used. And this is potentially something that the 145 Alive guys have brought along, as is also the activity contest on Tuesday night. I know Richard G4HGI up here, he's part of the Bolton Club. He's pretty keen in encouraging the local clubs to have a go on the activity contests and use all these VHF side of things, SSB all-mode rigs. So it's an interesting scenario, but like you say, it's all fragmented. It's difficult to pull it all together with being a country of such a size.
It is. I think, you know, it's never going to be perfect. I think you have to sort of concentrate on the things that you're interested in, and you know, go for them as much as you can, and hope that will build a critical, you know, tell people what you're doing, you know, through your club newsletter, you know, write to PW, write to Ragcom, all those things, and hopefully we'll get the message out there.
Absolutely. Evan, do you want to say any more to that? Do you want to respond to
that? Yeah, I agree with that. I think my feeling is that VHF stuff is something that really needs to be organised on the regional level, as opposed to the national level or the club level, in order to, you know, A, get a critical mass of activity, and B, just the realities of VHF propagation is going to be relatively localised. Whereas I think if you organise something on HF, for instance, you could have a nationwide Sunday morning net on 80 metres. You can't really do that on VHF or UHF, and it's sort of crying out for some sort of clearinghouse of ideas. And you know, I sort of mentioned Clublog. I think Clublog is something where people sort of put, you know, the record of activities there. Maybe there needs to be somewhere where people can put sort of ideas out and then organise stuff, because sure, people have got the internet, but who knows whose email, what Facebook groups are out there. Facebook's not really good, I don't think, for organising these things anyway, but that's the only real thing out there. So that's my feeling. Just coming back on the propagation side, I think with VHF, it's more of an acquired taste, and I think that's the sale to sell it. Because with HF, I mean, you can just show people the magic, you know, a string of wire and you're talking to New York or somewhere like that. Whereas VHF, it's, well, what, you can only get to Ireland or something like that. Yeah. But I think once you become a bit more experienced, it's more, you appreciate that a bit more. And I think some people might be getting a bit bored with HF. You know, they're supposed to be solar maximum, but, you know, you're getting all these geomagnetic storms, which is the flip side of solar maximum. It's just a bit frustrating. You know, this could be the, you know, another way to go. But yeah, I think it's hard. Just quickly on the propagation, just about just a question. I would have thought 70 SEMS would actually be better for something like Tropo, because you should be able to get those signals to refract a bit more, given the shorter wavelength than 2 meters, and also you've got sort of sharper antennas generally. Would that be true, or does the path loss sort of make a difference? Or
No, well, there's no generally, is there? But very often, yeah, a duct will form better on 70 SEMS than it will on 2 meters. So yes, you can very often see better propagation on 70 or 23 than you will on 2 meters. So yeah, that's absolutely true.
okay, yeah. It just seems 2 meters is the boundary years, and 70 SEMS is sort of the Cinderella, really, and that.
70, it's almost like a voyage of discovery, isn't it? You know, there's so many things you can do on there that perhaps you don't actually know what is around. But I think Tim's talk there with all the various, you know, the top possibilities actually highlights what is actually going on these bands. I mean, traditionally, obviously, it's a case of scanning all the S channels, and now I'm going back a bit, you know, to say, well, where's all the activity? Now it's, you know, if you listen to FM in certain areas, you just don't hear anything at all. But there are club nets out there, few and far between these days, which is a bit of a shame. But certainly that goes for 70 SEMS, and any activity is going to be on the repeaters. Even they are quiet at the moment. So who knows where things are actually taking place? Is there anybody else that wants to pose any questions? Simon? You were doing a bit of 4 meters, aren't you?
I'm doing a bit of all of them. I think really without this organisation that Evan was talking about, you know, the thing is, not enough of us call CQ. I think we'll slap the radio. All these channel bands we're talking about have calling channels, you know, and we will. I'm certainly guilty of slapping the radio on and listening to nothingness and not calling CQ. I think really, yeah. If you're complaining about the lack of activity on these bands, you should be calling CQ yourself and trying to drum a bit up.
I think a lot of this has actually come about because of the drop in the practical assessments with the training. When we did the practical assessments, people were actually going on air a lot more than what they are now. It's not practical assessment, and basically they're all mic shy.
Yeah, it was just a point. You've whet my appetite a bit with FT8, because I'm one of these that's guilty of sitting listening to an empty band and thinking, well, yeah, FT8's out there. I may not be able to hear something, but my rig may be hearing something. So I'm going to give it a try. Thank you.
Fantastic, well done. I'll look out for you.
Can I just say something about FT8 with I'm just wondering, it seems to be more sort of like for Tropo, for low intensity but very stable signals. Does it work well with sporadic E?
It does, yeah.
Right.
I mean, you can get caught. You know what fading can be like on sporadic E, so you can get caught with that sometimes. But generally, it's interesting. You know, there are some people who say, "Oh, it was much better when we did all the sporadic E on sideband." Well, I'm sure many of you have listened to 144.3 in a sporadic E opening, and you've heard plenty of QSOs that were never completed properly. So I think on FT8 there's a little bit more rigor because the software actually demands it. So you might not let's put it this way: the contacts that you complete, that you know they've been completed properly, rather than being a bit iffy. So yeah, it does work quite well. I've worked yeah, quite a lot of sporadic E on FT8 on 2 meters. So yeah, give it a go.
Do you find that FT8 on 2 meters, the VHF band, is more experimental, i.e. what you can do, rather than HF, where it's just a case of go out there and wipe every, drag everybody up as much as you can work. Whereas 2 meters and V77, it's a bit more experimental.
I think it probably is. Yeah, it's it is. Yes, I mean I suppose the 2 meter contacts that you make on FT8 from day to day, they're pretty run of the mill, but they're still good fun to make, and it shows that there's a path there and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, certainly the much longer distance stuff and people just trying different paths and so on, that is a bit more experimental, a little bit more out there. So yeah, I like to think so anyway.
I suppose the same goes for EME and all that kind of thing as well, doesn't it? When you look at it, I mean, I keep seeing the contacts that Peter Taylor seems to be working from deep into Cornwall, and you kind of think, well, I'd love to be able to do that, but of course he's got the setup to be able to do it. But I find that the satellites is bringing in quite a bit of interest as well, because whenever you listen to a satellite, it's never quiet, or at least very rarely quiet. And there's usually something going on, somebody calling, especially when we've had this SSTV event. I found changing over to the repeater on the ISS, it was quite quiet, so I was able to actually work something.
Oh wow.
It certainly makes a difference. And when you've been out there, I think it was Simon who we had on a few weeks ago, he was saying you walk out into an open area with a narrow antenna, you're bound to attract attention and being that nutty amateur from down the road.
And just to confirm, the Bolton with the 23.7 is on the ground.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Ross, isn't it? G6 GBR.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's knowing that these things are around, doesn't it? I mean, I think that's half the battle.
Oldham do advertise their nets, and yeah, they've got their Monday night. They rotate a variety of modes on Monday night nets.
I think they do one SSB 2 meter a month or
I
something.
think they've got a sideband net, a D-Star net, a C4 FM net, and there's a 4 meter net they do on a Monday as well. And actually, I joined one of them, and then their net joined the Bolton Wireless Club 4 meter net that was on the same night.
Brilliant.
So, I'd never heard. That was probably more activity than on 4 meters that night than I'd ever heard. But
I mean, I'm going to say there is that potential, because I know Tim, you tried it where you try to get details of everybody's nets, didn't you? And to some extent, that is the point, isn't it? That going to each individual club's website is going around the houses, should we say? So realistically, what you need to be is some central point where all these nets are recorded.
Some directory.
The back of Radcom, of course, you've got the Region 3 nets. Most of those are advertised in the back of Radcom, so you can see them. If you're on the border of 2 regions, that might be less convenient. But
It's just on that, the stuff that's advertised in Radcom. I mean, what would be good is that kind of stuff be put on sort of like a spreadsheet form where you could filter it, say by region, distance. I mean, the distance from here to Cheltenham or whatever, is that going to be in range of the nets and stuff like that? And
so I've repeated the book type thing, but for nets.
The nets, any sort of activity, but sort of have it in a database type form, which you can look through. Because Radcom does have a lot of information, but you have to churn through it. And whereas, what I'd like, I mean, would be just like an Excel spreadsheet thing. Say, I want to get nets sort of on a weeknight, between 6 and 9, within 200 kilometres or something like that of my QTH, and you could sort of filter that down to whatever, and then go on. Save me sort of flicking through Radcom and then looking up where these places are, and it just seems we should get with a
spreadsheet which is very close to that.
Oh well, that's good.
Might be 18 months out of date, I think, but yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
From what you say, then it sounds like a task for AI.
Yeah, it
AI
probably
could do that.
Yeah,
Might
good.
be able to.
Yeah, you could just
Yeah.
type something in and off it
I
spits
might
it
have a
out.
play with that.
I say, I mean, that spreadsheet actually might be useful to make that public or something if you can, even
Yeah,
if
we
it's a bit
did.
old.
Yeah, we put it on the Practical Wireless
Or like a
website quite
spreader,
frequently, and then there was some sort of changes around PW, and that stopped happening. But yeah, there might be some possibilities to do something with AI, as you say.
You mentioned Radcom earlier on. Well, I reckon if we had a show of hands how many people were part of the RSGB these days, then probably quite a few are not. So they're not seeing Radcom. So realistically, if they want to publicise these kind of events, nets or whatever it happens to be, then it needs to be on the RSGB, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does.
Right. Okay. Well, I think it's a good idea to say, first of all, thank you everybody for joining in tonight, and because it's been a very interesting talk, Tim. You've covered so many aspects of VHF I don't think any of us have actually thought about, but certainly it's been an interesting one from that point of view. And it's great to see the number of questions and topics discussed. So thank you all for coming. Thank you very much indeed again, Tim. Hope all's well in Cheltenham. And look forward to, I hope all's well back home as well. So
Me too.
Especially with Cedric as well. So anyway,
Thank you.
we shall wish you the best of luck, and hopefully we'll see you again sometime in the future, near
Fabulous.
future.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, sir. Thank
Take
you.
care. See you. Bye-bye.